Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got a returning guest and we're checking back in on Havven that has recently rebranded to Synthetix. Is that how I pronounce it, Kain?
Yeah, that's right, Synthetix, yeah, which is a little bit easier to pronounce than Havven. Sometimes people would get confused there.
It is. So let's dive straight into it. Why the rebrand? Why that name? And what's been happening in the year since we first spoke?
Yeah, for sure. So, Havven was originally conceived as a US dollar backed stablecoin. It was just crypto collateralized instead of fiat collateralized. So, very different to Tether, more similar to Maker. And so when I initially came up with the name and the brand, it was kind of centered around this idea of having a single stablecoin. As the platform has developed, we've gotten, I guess more capability has kind of made the name a little bit redundant and less clear. And so, we were building out one of the tools that we use for Synthetix, which is the Synthetix Exchange, which is essentially a DApp that allows you to trade different synthetic assets amongst each other without a counterparty. And when the branding came out for that, the guy that we work with, Matt Vernon, is amazing. He's done some stuff for Dharma and a few other projects. And we got the Synthetix Exchange designs, and I was like, whoa, like that brand just is great. It looks so good. It kind of is really clear what it's doing. And I said to the guys, like, this is our chance before we launch on mainnet with the kind of version 2 contracts. Like, if we want to upgrade it, let's do it. And so everyone was kind of a bit scared about it, but we were like, no, let's just do it. And we went for it. So in about 2 weeks, we kind of rebranded everything. So, yeah.
So rather than one safe haven, we've now got a range of these synthetic assets. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. So what are the pairs that you've launched so far?
So AUD, thankfully, which is a huge one, obviously, as you can imagine. Blue Shift, which is the other company that I run, which is a distribution network. We wanted to kind of tie into that for a long time, but it's hard when it's a US dollar backed stablecoin. Like, you need that Australian dollar backed stablecoin for Australians to kind of get it. So that's going to be a big one for us for next year. Early next year, we've got a lot of stuff planned to kind of roll that out, get people using it. The other ones are Japanese yen, Korean won, the euro, and obviously we still have USD. And then the one that people are kind of really interested in is the ounce of gold, right? Yeah. So a synthetic asset that tracks gold.
Yeah. Now, like Maker, as you said, you guys are fully on-chain crypto-backed stablecoin. I think people have their head around this concept now for the fiat pairs, like the digital Aussie dollar. But how does this work? Or a quick intro for people that aren't familiar, but more so for the gold-backed stablecoin.
For sure. So, the collateral token, which is called SNX now, so the Synthetix Network token, that token is locked and provides the collateral or the value or the safety for users of the asset. So, you take your SNX tokens, you've got $100 of them, let's say, you lock them up, and against that value, you issue synthetic assets. So previously, you were able to issue US dollars, and we keep a buffer between the value that's locked and the amount of value that's issued. So in the case of $100, you'd be able to issue $20 worth of synthetic assets. So what's interesting about that is if you have a price feed, you can essentially issue any asset. And so, now we've got a price feed that's kind of extended, which that actually wasn't the hard part. The hard part was handling tracking the value as it changed into different flavors. And that's probably a longer conversation, how we kind of were able to solve that problem. But it took us probably about 6 months from, we knew we had the capability of doing this, but to actually implement it was about 6 months from start to finish to kind of find that solution. Yeah. And so now we've got this gold asset, which someone can literally hold an ounce of gold on the Ethereum blockchain that will track the price of an ounce of gold, and they can trade it back into dollars or hold it as gold without needing the physical gold to be there.
Yeah. So with that over collateralization, you said that ratio is 5-to-1. So it's fully backed until the asset falls 80%. So a lot of cryptos are down 90% or more now. How did your system hold up during that correction?
It's held up fairly well, although obviously in the early days, it was really only the foundation that was issuing. But what's happened is at the peak, we had about $1.6, $1.7 million worth of assets issued. It's now come back down to about 1.1. So, as the network value, the value of all the network tokens, the SNX tokens falls, we have to burn the assets to keep that in alignment. And so the incentive to do that is that if you don't do it, you get a penalty. The fees that you are issued for providing stability in the system are reduced. And so that's one of the things we just recently upgraded as well, is to kind of increase that penalty.
And I guess you guys are of the opinion that as this ecosystem grows, the volatility will shrink and will be far less likely to have 80% corrections once this space is very mature.
Yeah, my personal view, I guess, is that I think the Bitcoin cycle that's kind of driven this, and each time different assets get brought along with it. In the past, Litecoin, Feathercoin, things like that, and this round it was Dash and Ethereum and various other assets. Bitcoin's going to do the same thing, and some of those assets will still be there in the next cycle, and there'll be some new things that people haven't heard of that get brought up. I think one of the most powerful things about Bitcoin is not having an intrinsic value. It can very easily, have these large sort of growths in value and then declines. I think that's actually a feature, not a bug. And I don't know how long it'll take for that to kind of play out, but my sense is we've got 3 or 4 more of these cycles to go before we start to kind of tamp it down. That's just my personal sense.
So what are your thoughts, just building on that, about the death of the ICO? And everyone's excited about these STOs, but I know you've got some pretty strong thoughts about the importance of having actually decentralized projects. And if we start to just issue these and trade them on stock markets as securities, we lose a lot of that.
Yeah, I think there's certain things that won't be funded by traditional means is fundamentally what I believe, right? And if you look at Ethereum, that's a great example. Like Ethereum, there's no chance that VCs are going to fund this crazy 19-year-old guy running around talking about a world computer. It's just not going to happen. And so if you try and take a traditional fundraising method like issuing equity in a private company and just tokenize that, there'll be a lot of use cases for that, no question in my mind. But I don't think it captures all the use cases. And so while it's a more efficient way of doing something, which I think in blockchain allows for more efficient ways of doing things and reduces costs, I think it's not the entirety of what the opportunity is. And so I think there will still be room for decentralized projects, however they're funded. Things like FOMO 3D that, wasn't funded by an ICO, it was funded by people putting money in. We'll see more and more of those kinds of things over the next 2 to 3 years alongside this other more traditional path.
I completely agree with that, yeah. What are your thoughts on Ethereum and scaling? Is it going to play a role as the public chain for a lot of these STOs as well as the ICOs going forward, or how do you see that playing out?
It's an interesting question because, I think someone like Carl from Multicoin, I think the Multicoin guys coined this idea of sovereign grade censorship resistance versus platform grade, and different levels of censorship resistance, which we're building on EOS as well as Ethereum, and so we now understand a lot better the trade-offs on EOS, and there are trade-offs there, there's no question. But if you're building something that's regulated, the platform doesn't need to kind of be at the bleeding edge in terms of censorship resistance, I guess. So, it wouldn't surprise me if people move more towards that. That said, I think Ethereum in terms of security of funds has a very, very strong track record. And the question is more around throughput than it is around security. Whereas EOS, there's still some questions there, I think, and other platforms that they're going to have to take time before someone's going to be willing to put $1 billion worth of assets on them. So I think Ethereum still has a big lead in that race.
There's some specific applications, I think, as you say, that I agree. There's going to be use cases for others. What are your thoughts on Ethereum Classic? Because one of the things when Ethereum is scaling and going to switch to proof of stake, hopefully in the future, I believe that is when we're going to see a lot of song and dance about Ethereum Classic. Come mine us, we're the real Ethereum, from a few certain individuals.
Yeah, look, I think Ethereum Classic is just one of the most interesting things. The fact that it even exists, and why it exists. There's a long story around the DAO hack and and fork and all that sort of stuff. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out when the transition starts to happen. If miners obviously decide not to act as validators and put their hash power towards that, or if they go to something else. I think like everything, there'll be a lot of noise, as you say, about it. But to try and predict how it plays out right now, I think it's pretty hard. I think it's going to be around for a while as a proof of work chain. I mean, Ethereum, the proof of work chain is very powerful. It does a lot of things really well. So it's hard to see it kind of losing any awareness. I think over the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to be around. I think so.
Well, thanks, Kain. Any final thoughts for viewers at home? But good luck with everything you guys are doing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more synthetic assets.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got, as I said, there's 6 already that we've launched. The plan is we're going to hold some votes to allow the community to, pick their favorite currency or commodity or what have you. Yeah. As we get a little bit closer and we're more comfortable with what the system's doing and how it's performing, we may even add assets like Bitcoin or Ethereum potentially. So other cryptocurrencies that can be traded as an ERC20 token without being wrapped. They're just a synthetic version of it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming.
I think that's definitely our next discussion next time we're on the channel. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate you having me.
Cheers, guys.